A year ago, this kitchen table was the loneliest thing I owned. Tonight, it is the warmest. My daughter is standing at the counter with flour to her wrists. She is working a bowl of dough from a card in my late wife's handwriting. The baby is asleep in the next room. The dog is under the table with his chin on my boot. The light coming through the window is the soft gold you only get for about 10 minutes in the evening, and then it is gone. Rachel looks over her shoulder at me and smiles. Just smiles, no reason. That smile cost us both more than I know how to say. Because there was a night, not so long back, when my own daughter called me on the telephone and asked me not to come to her wedding. And I said the word a father should never have to say to a child. I said, all right. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell it the way it happened. My name is Curtis Ambrose. I was 67 years old that autumn, retired, a widower. I live in Marrow's Bend, a small city tucked in the folds of East Tennessee, where the hills come down close to the road and everybody thinks they know everybody. I built houses for 40 years. Started framing at 18 for a man named Pell, who paid in cash and cuss words. Married Sylvia at 24. Started my own company at 26 and called it Ambrose Homes. And for a long time, that name meant something in 3 counties. We put up schools and churches and about 400 family homes. I sold the company in 2009 when my knees told me it was time and my heart was not in the office end of it. Then Sylvia passed in 2014. Her heart, quiet, in her sleep, in the chair by the window she loved. 33 years married, and then a morning I could not wake her. Some mornings I still reach across the bed before I remember. Boone was Sylvia's dog first. She named him after Daniel Boone because she said every house needs one creature in it that is not afraid of the dark. He is old now, gray in the muzzle, and he follows me from room to room like he is worried I will wander off. Maybe he is. We keep an eye on each other, Boone and I, 2 old fellows in a house full of a woman who is not there anymore. The town has a way of deciding who you are and then never checking again. To Marrow's Bend, I was the retired builder who kept to himself, and that suited me fine. A man can get a great deal done when nobody is watching him do it. So that is the man. A retired builder in a dented truck. A dog named Boone. Black coffee at the diner on Thursdays. A porch rail I will fix for any neighbor who brings a pie. That is what the town saw when I drove by. A quiet old fellow who used to build things. They did not see the rest. I did not want them to. I need you to understand something about my house. Sylvia decorated every room in it, and I have not moved one thing. Her reading chair is still angled to the window. There is a ring on the arm of it where she set her coffee for 30 years, and I never once wiped it clean, and I never will. She used to say a house is just lumber until somebody forgives it enough to call it home. She forgave this one into a home. I have been living inside her forgiveness ever since. My son Aaron lives 2 states over, in Missouri, with a good wife and a job that keeps him busy. We talk on Sundays. He is his mother's child, steady and slow to anger. And then there is Rachel. Rachel is my youngest. She was born in 1990, and from the first day she was the brightest thing in any room she entered, quick and warm and hungry for the world. When Sylvia died, Rachel was 24, and for a while it was just the 2 of us leaning on each other. I would have laid down in traffic for that girl. I still would. That is the part that matters, so hold on to it. Whatever comes next, hold on to how much I loved her. Because the spring before all this, Rachel got engaged. His name was Grant Sutcliffe. Nice enough young man, I thought at first. His people had money, the kind that has been sitting in the same banks for 3 generations. His mother, Camille, ran the Garden Society and the Museum Board, and, near as I could tell, most of the county's opinions about who was somebody and who was not. And I watched my daughter start to climb. It happened slow. That is how these things go. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to be ashamed of their father. It comes in small pieces, each one small enough that if you said it out loud, you would sound foolish for minding. The first piece was the engagement dinner at the country club. Long table, white cloth, more forks than a man needs. Grant's uncle, a big pink fellow with a laugh you could hear in the parking lot, asked me what I did. I said I used to build houses. He grinned and said, "So you are the handyman. We may need you for the gutters." The table laughed. Little polite laughs. And Rachel laughed too. She laughed about a half a second too long, and then she looked down at her plate, and I saw something move across her face that I had never seen aimed at me before. It looked like apology. It looked like shame. I said I was pretty good with gutters. Everybody laughed again, easier now, and the moment passed for them. It did not pass for me. The next piece was the truck. My old work truck, the dented one, the one that has carried more lumber than most men carry in a lifetime. Rachel came by the house one afternoon to talk about flowers, and before she left, she stood in the driveway, looking at that truck, a long moment. She said, "Dad, when you come to the club for the tasting, would you maybe park around back by the kitchen? It is just easier. Easier. I have been hit in the head by a falling 2x4. I have caught my thumb between a joist and a header. None of it hurt like that one small word from my girl. Easier. Easier for who?" I said, "Sure, honey. Park around back. I can do that." I did not tell her that I had bought her mother her wedding ring out of the cab of a truck just like that one. Some things you do not say. You just carry them. The pieces kept coming through the summer. I was seated at the far end of things. My name got left off the little printed cards. When Camille Sutcliffe met me, she shook my hand like she was checking it for dust. I heard secondhand that she had told someone the Ambrose side was, quote, salt of the earth, which is the kind of thing people say when they mean something else and want credit for being kind while they say it. There was a cake tasting at a bakery in the good part of town. I came because Rachel asked me to, and I stood in the back while Camille Sutcliffe told the baker what my daughter would prefer. Rachel did not correct her. I watched my girl nod along to a stranger deciding her own wedding cake, and I understood that she had decided the easiest way through that summer was to disappear a little, and that disappearing a little meant disappearing me first. Then there was the seating chart. Rachel brought it by the house one evening, laid out on poster board with little paper names she could move around. I did not ask to see it, but I saw my own name on its little paper square, sitting off in a corner of the board by the kitchen doors, the same doors she wanted me to park my truck behind. And I watched her, without quite meaning to, pick up the square with my name on it and hold it in her hand a moment, unsure where a father goes when the father is an embarrassment. She caught me looking. She put the square down fast, face down, like I had seen something I was not supposed to. I said the chart looked real nice. I said her mother would have loved the little paper names. She did not answer. She rolled up the poster board, and she left early that night. I did not make a fuss. That is not my way, and it was not Sylvia's way, and it would not have helped Rachel any. But I want to be honest with you, it ached. It ached in a place that does not have a name. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, the telephone rang. It was a Tuesday evening. I was on the porch with Boone and a cup of coffee gone cold. I saw Rachel's name on the little screen, and I felt my whole chest lift, the way it always did. "Hi, baby," I said. There was a pause, a long one. I have hung enough doors to know when something is not sitting square in its frame. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not be hurt." Nothing good ever follows those words. She said, "It is a small venue. And Grant's family, they are very particular about the guest list, and the photos, and how everything looks. And it would be simpler, this one time if you did not come." I did not say anything. She kept going the way people do when the silence scares them. She said it was not about me, it was about them. It was about keeping the peace with the Sutcliffes. It was one day we would celebrate on our own after. She promised she would explain it all someday. I listened to my daughter give me a whole speech about why I should not stand in the room when she got married. And here is the thing I have never told anyone until now. In that moment, I had it in me to end all of it with a few sentences. I could have told her exactly who her father was, what I had done and was still doing out in those hills where nobody was looking. It would have changed the whole call. It might have changed the whole wedding. I did not say a word of it, because a gift you have to demand is not a gift, and a seat at your child's wedding that you win by playing a trump card is not the same as being wanted there. I did not want to be let in. I wanted to be loved. Those are different rooms, and no amount of shouting gets you from one to the other. So I said the only thing left to say. I said, all right, Rachel, I understand. I love you. Go be happy. And I hung up the phone, and I sat in the dark on that porch until the coffee was ice, and the dog gave up on me and went inside. The next morning I did one thing. There was a check I had been keeping in the drawer of Sylvia's roll-top desk, saved up over years, meant to be my gift to my daughter on her wedding day, the kind of number that would have made her gasp. I put it back in the account it came from. Quiet, no drama. If I was not going to be her father in that room, I was not going to be her checkbook either. That was not spite. That was just a man declining to be a wallet where he was not welcome as a person. And I looked for a long moment at the old green footlocker in the hall closet, the one I never opened in front of anybody. I did not open it that day. I did not need to read what was inside to know it was true. I will tell you what was in it soon. Word gets around a small town, and it got to Dewey Latham inside of 2 days. Dewey was my foreman for 30 years. We put up half of Marrow's Bend together. He is 70 now, all elbows and opinions, and he loves me like a brother, which mostly means he stays mad at me on my behalf. He came up the porch steps that Thursday with a thermos and a face like a thunderhead. Is it true, he said. Is it true she told you to stay home? I said it was. He set the thermos down hard enough to rattle the boards. He said, Curtis, you built the roof over half these people's heads. You put up the very fellowship hall where that boy proposed to her. I framed it with these hands. And they are calling you the handyman and telling you to stay in your house like a dog that bites. I said, Dewey, sit down. He did not sit down. He paced my porch and he said things about the Sutcliffes that I will not repeat, not because they were cuss words, Dewey does not cuss, but because they were true and unkind, and a man should be careful with that combination. Then he stopped and he looked at me and he said, why do you take it? You could end it with one phone call. You know you could. And I told him the truth. I said, the work was never about the credit, Dewey. If I do it so that someday somebody claps, then I never did it at all. I did it because it needed doing, and I could do it. That does not stop being true just because my daughter's embarrassed of me. He said, you always did talk like a church sign. But he sat down then. He poured us both coffee from the thermos. And after a while he said, quiet, your Sylvia would have marched down there and turned that country club upside down. I laughed. I said, no, Sylvia would have done exactly what I am doing. She would have let the facts do the work. She used to tell me, Kurt, you never once had to raise your voice to raise a wall. Dewey did not have an answer for that. He loved her too. So we sat on the porch, 2 old men and a dog, and we let it be. I did not know sitting there that the facts had already put on their boots, that they were, right that minute, climbing into a television truck and coming for me whether I wanted them to or not. Let me tell you now what was in the footlocker and what I had been doing with the 15 years since I sold my company. When Ambrose Homes sold, I did not need to work again. But a man does not stop being what he is just because he stops getting paid for it. And there is no shortage in these hills of people the world has knocked flat. There was a fire out past the reservoir in 2010 that took a family's home down to the block. No insurance to speak of. A veteran, a young man who had come back from overseas missing most of one leg and all of his patients. He and his wife and their kids were living in a motel by the interstate. I heard about it at the diner, and I could not eat my eggs. So I went out there with my truck and my tools, and I rebuilt that man's house. Did not charge a dime, did not put a sign in the yard. When his wife asked me who to thank, I told her to thank the good Lord and get their storm door adjusted before winter. And then there was another one, a widow whose roof caved under an ice load, and another, a flood down in the bottoms, and another. There was a school teacher named Miss Odom, retired, who lost her little place to a kitchen fire and did not have the money to rebuild and was too proud to say so. Her neighbors told me. I went out on a Monday and I told her I was with a county program, which was almost true, and that it would not cost her a dime, which was entirely true. She argued with me for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she let me start, and she made me lunch every afternoon for 6 weeks, and she never once found out my name. There was a young couple down in the bottoms whose house took 4 feet of river water. Everything gone. The photographs, the baby's crib, the wedding dress in a box. I could not give them back the photographs, but I could give them dry walls and a floor that did not smell of the river. So I did. I learned a thing over those 15 years that I did not know when I was building the big houses for the big money. I learned that the difference between a person going under and a person making it is very often just one other person who shows up with a truck and does not ask for anything back. That is the whole secret. There is no more to it than that. You just have to be willing to be the one who shows up. Over 15 years, it came to 41 homes. I kept a little trust to pay for the materials, funded out of the sale of the company, and I ran it so that my name never landed on a single permit that the families would ever see. My lawyer knew. The county knew there was some quiet outfit doing the work. Nobody knew it was the handyman. And every so often, one of those families would send a letter, a thank you note, a child's drawing, a photograph of a porch with people standing on it who had a place to stand again. I never answered them. I could not have said why. I just put every one of them in that green footlocker and closed the lid. I had a drawer full of proof of exactly who I was. I had never once needed anybody to read it. Now, there was a young reporter in this part of the state named Bethany Cardwell. Sharp, stubborn, the kind who does not let a thread go once she has hold of it. And for the better part of a year, she had been chasing a story she could not quite catch about a man who showed up after disasters, rebuilt what was broken, and vanished before anybody could shake his hand. She called him, in her own notes, the builder who disappears. She got her thread, in the end, from Earl Deacon. Earl was that first veteran from the fire back in 2010. Over the years, Earl had made it his business to know who I was, though he had the grace to keep it to himself as long as I asked him to. But Earl had watched the news chase this ghost for a year, and Earl had decided in his own words that the world was getting meaner, and it could stand to hear about one man who went the other way. The last job I did before the wedding was at Earl's place, as it happened. His ramp had rotted at the base, and I was pouring a new footing for it. When I got there was a card tucked in his mailbox. Bethany Cardwell and a phone number, and a note asking me to please call. I put it in my shirt pocket without reading past the name. Earl watched me do it. He said, "Curtis, they want to tell people what you did. 41 families. Let them." I said, "Earl, your ramp needs a new sweep on the bottom, or you will get water under it by January." He laughed at me. He said I was the most contrary do-gooder God ever made. I finished his footing. I went home. I never called the number. But here is the thing about a true story. It does not need your permission to be told. Bethany Cardwell had 41 families. She had the trust records, which are not secret if you know where the county keeps its paper. She had Earl on camera wiping his eyes. She had enough, and then some. And she had an air date. The wedding was on a Saturday. So was the 6 o'clock news. I was not there for what happened next. I heard it later in pieces from about a dozen people who could not stop telling me. So I am going to tell it to you the way they told it to me, and you will have to trust that I have put the pieces in the right order. The reception was at the same country club. A big ballroom, chandeliers, a band. 200 and some guests. The Sutcliffes in their element, Camille moving through the room like a woman inspecting her own coronation. Along one wall, the club had set up 2 big screens. They were meant for a slideshow, baby pictures of the bride and groom, that sort of thing, queued up to play during the dinner. The AV fellow was a young man from the club staff, who I am told was not entirely sure what he was doing. At 6 o'clock, something crossed. A wire, a setting, nobody ever did figure it out for certain. And instead of the slideshow, both of those big screens came alive with the local news. And there, filling a wall of my daughter's wedding, was my face. It was a still photograph, one somebody had taken of me on a job site years back, sleeves rolled, a level in my hand, not looking at the camera. And under it, Bethany Cardwell's voice, steady and warm, saying the words I had spent 15 years making sure nobody would say. She said for 15 years, no one knew his name. He came after the fires and the floods. He rebuilt what families could not, and he left before anyone could thank him. Tonight, we can finally tell you who he is. He is a retired builder from Marrow's Bend. His name is Curtis Ambrose, And these are just a few of the 41 families he brought home. And then the screens filled with porches. Family after family, standing in front of houses I had built for them, waving, crying, holding up children. The band stopped. Somebody had signaled them to stop. The ballroom went quiet. 200 people, and you could have heard a napkin fall. On the screens, the story kept going. Bethany Cardwell was standing now in front of Earl Deacon's house, and Earl was on camera, and Earl was crying and not ashamed of it. And Earl said, "That man built my family a home when I had nothing, and he would not even let me shake his hand." He said, "You want to know what a hero looks like? He drives a dented truck, and he tells you to fix your storm door." 200 people at my daughter's wedding heard a one-legged veteran call the handyman a hero. The waiters had stopped moving. The bartender had stopped pouring. Grant's big pink uncle, the one who had called me the handyman, set his drink down on the table and did not pick it back up. And my daughter, in her white dress, stood in the middle of the floor and watched her father's face on the wall, in the exact spot where she had told me I could not stand. They say she did not move for a long moment. They say her hand went up to her mouth. They say Camille Sutcliffe started toward her, and Rachel put a hand out, not looking, and stopped her cold. And then Rachel walked out, straight through the tables, out the double doors, into the parking lot in her wedding dress, and she took out her phone. My phone rang at about 20 past 6. I was home. I was in Sylvia's kitchen heating up a can of soup, because a man has to eat even on the night his daughter marries without him. Boone was at my feet. The little television on the counter was off. I did not even know yet that any of it was happening. I saw Rachel's name and I almost did not answer. I thought, she is at her reception, she has dialed me by accident, I will not intrude. But a father answers, so I did. There was wind on the line, and then my daughter's voice, and it was very small, and it was breaking. She said, "Dad." I said, "I am here, baby." She said, "Dad, why is your face on the news? Why is the whole room? Dad, 41 families. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Silence. Then a daughter crying in a parking lot in a wedding dress. I had waited a long time to hear my girl want to know her father. And I want to tell you, I took no joy in the way it finally came. There was no part of me sitting in that kitchen that felt like I had won anything. I felt like a man watching a wave he could not stop. I said the only true thing I had. I said, "Rachel, I did not tell you because it was never a thing to be told. It was just a thing to be done. Now you go on back inside. It is your wedding day. We can talk tomorrow." She said no. She said, "I am coming to you." And she hung up. It was raining by the time her car came up my drive. Not hard, just steady, the kind of October rain that means winter is thinking about it. She came up the porch steps in that white dress with the hem gone dark and heavy with water, and she stood on the same boards where Dewey had stood 2 weeks before, and she looked at me through the screen door. She did not have a single excuse ready. That was how I knew she had come as herself, and not as the woman who had been climbing all summer. She said, "I was ashamed of the wrong person, Dad. It was not you. It was me. I was ashamed of myself, and I put it on you because you were the safest place to put it, because I knew you would take it. I did not tell her it was all right, because it was not all right, not yet, and I have never believed in handing people an easy pardon just to make the porch stop being uncomfortable. A pardon like that is worth exactly what it costs, which is nothing." I told her the truth instead. I said, "Rachel, I have loved you every day of your life, including the days you did not want to be seen with me. That never once wavered. But love and pride cannot sit in the same chair. You had them fighting over the one seat all summer, and pride kept winning, and it cost you your father at your own wedding. That is a real thing. We do not get to pretend it did not happen." She nodded. She was crying, but she nodded, and she did not look away, which took more courage than the whole rest of the night put together. Then I opened the screen door and I said, "Now come in out of the rain before you catch your death. I will make coffee." We sat at this kitchen table. She had a dish towel around her shoulders over the wet dress, and it was, I will admit, the strangest sight I have seen at this table. My daughter in her wedding gown, with a towel and a cup of black coffee, And then I did the thing I had never done for anyone. I went to the hall closet and I brought out the green footlocker, and I set it on the table, and I opened the lid. I said, "You asked why I never told you. I am not much for telling, so I will show you." And I let my daughter read the letters. 41 families worth. Thank you notes in shaky handwriting, a child's crayon drawing of a yellow house with a sun over it, a photograph of Earl Deacon standing on his ramp giving a thumbs up, a note from a widow that just said, "I do not know who you are, but my grandchildren have a dry room to sleep in tonight because of you, and I will pray for you every night I have left." Rachel read every single one. I watched my girl, 34 years old, meet her father for the first time across a kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. When she got to the bottom of the box, she put her hands flat on the letters, and she put her head down on her hands, and she wept in a way I had not seen since we buried her mother. I put my hand on her wet hair. I did not say anything. Some silences are the whole prayer. We stayed at that table until past midnight. At some point, she took off the wedding dress in the bathroom and came back out in an old flannel shirt of mine and a pair of sweatpants from her high school years that she still kept in her old room. And that was when I knew my daughter had come home in more than one way. She asked me if she should have the marriage annulled. She was that upset. She thought maybe the whole thing had been built wrong from the ground, and I am a builder, so I understood the fear. A thing built wrong at the base will not stand. I told her no. I told her the base was not the problem. The base was two young people who loved each other. The problem was everything they had let other people pile on top of it. You do not tear down a house for that. You take the wrong things off of it, one at a time, until it can breathe again. Then you see what you actually built. She went home to her husband that night. And the next morning, the two of them started taking the wrong things off. Now, I could tell you that the Sutcliffes got what was coming to them and leave you there. That is what a lot of stories do. They burn the house down at the end and call it justice. But that is not what this is, and it is not what happened, and it is not the kind of man I am trying to be at 69 years old. Here is what actually happened. The Sutcliffes were humbled, and that was enough. There is no punishment you can design for people like that worse than a room full of their own guests, watching them realize how badly they misjudged a man. Camille Sutcliffe sent me a letter about a week later. It was stiff, and it was formal, and it used the word regret 3 times. But down at the bottom, in a different ink, like she had added it after she meant to stop, she had written, "You raised a fine daughter, and we did not deserve the grace you have shown." That last line was real. I could tell. I kept it. It is in the footlocker now with the others. Grant's big uncle, the gutter man, drove out to my place unannounced one Saturday and stood in my driveway with his hat in his hands and apologized like a man who had never once had to do it before and found out it was harder than it looked. I shook his hand. I told him if he ever needed his gutters done, he knew where to find the handyman. He laughed, but it was a shaky laugh, and I think he understood he had been let off easy. That is the mercy. Accountability is a door held open, not a door slammed. You let people see what they did. You do not have to destroy them to do it. Most of the time, being truly seen is punishment and grace both, all at once. Winter came in slow after that, and my daughter started showing up. The first Saturday, she came out to a job site in a pair of Sylvia's old work boots that she found in the mudroom, 3 sizes too big, laces double knotted. There was a widow over in the next county whose back steps had rotted through, and I was rebuilding them, and Rachel showed up at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and no idea which end of a hammer to hold. She was a terrible carpenter. I want that on the record. She bent more nails than she drove. She measured wrong twice and cut a board too short and looked at me like the world had ended. But she showed up. Every Saturday. That was the whole job, really. Showing up. And a strange thing happened with Grant. Once he stopped performing for his mother, once he stopped trying to be a Sutcliffe and started trying to be a husband, there was a decent young man in there after all. He started coming to the sites too. Turned out he was handier than my own daughter, which was not a high bar, but he learned and he liked it. And I watched him find something in a day of honest work that no country club had ever given him. My son Aaron flew in from Missouri that spring, and the 3 of us reframed a porch for a family whose place had come through a bad storm. 3 generations of Ambrose men on one job, if you count Grant, and by then I did count Grant. Aaron watched his little sister drive a nail almost straight, and he looked at me, and he did not say anything, but his eyes said a great deal. He had always been on my side. He had just been too far away to do anything but pray, and now he got to swing a hammer instead, and I think that mended something in him too. Rachel started keeping the trust's books. It turned out my terrible carpenter was a fine bookkeeper, and within a few months she knew every family we had helped, and every family still waiting. And she started finding them faster than I ever had. She was better at the finding than I was. I had been doing it one funeral and one diner conversation at a time. She did it like she was born to it. One evening she looked up from the ledger and she said, "Dad, there are so many. How did you carry all of these by yourself for 15 years? I said I did not carry them. I set them down as I went. That is the trick nobody tells you. You do the one in front of you and you set it down and you go find the next one. The pile only crushes you if you try to hold them all at once." Camille's cold thawed by inches. She never became warm exactly. But by spring she was asking Rachel how the projects were going. And once she sent along a check for the materials trust, and I let her, because pride works both ways, and a person trying to change should be allowed to. I wrote one letter that winter myself. I wrote to Bethany Cardwell, the reporter. I thanked her. I told her I had spent 15 years making sure her story would never get told, and that I had been wrong to, because a young man named Earl and a whole lot of families had been trying to say thank you for years, and I had never let them. I told her the story she told did more good than my silence ever did. That was hard for me to write. It was also true. And then it was spring. This spring. 2026. Rachel came to me in March and took my hand and put it on her belly, and she said, "Dad, we have news." My grandbaby was born the first week of April. A girl. They named her Sylvie. For a woman who knew, better than anyone I ever met, that a house is just lumber until somebody forgives it enough to call it home. We had done a lot of forgiving, my daughter and I. This past year and change, we had done more forgiving than framing, and I have done a lot of framing. And so we come back around to where I started. This kitchen table, the gold light for its 10 minutes, Rachel with flour to her wrists, working her mother's dough from her mother's card, the baby asleep, the dog on my boot. She looked over her shoulder at me a minute ago and smiled for no reason. And I thought, this is the house I built that I am proudest of. Not the 400 homes with the Ambrose name once meant something. Not the 41 I gave away in the dark. This one, this table, this girl who came back through the rain in a wedding dress and learned to drive a nail and named her daughter after her grandmother. This one I am proudest of. If you have ever been made to feel small at your own family's table, if you have ever loved someone who was ashamed of you before they had the sense to understand you, then I hope you will do one thing for me tonight. I hope you will share this story with somebody who might need to hear it. And down in the comments, I would like you to tell me about the person who saw you when it was hard to be seen. I read them. Everyone. I am the man with the footlocker full of letters, remember? I know what it is to keep the ones that matter. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. And remember this, whatever age you are, whatever table you are sitting at, you do not owe anybody the proof of your worth. You do not have to put it up on a screen to make it real. Live it quietly, do the work because it needs doing, and let the truth keep its own schedule. It always arrives, usually when you least expect it, and never a minute before it is ready. Pride and love cannot sit in the same chair. Choose the one that builds.